Thank you very much,
Greatness, they say, begets greatness. Hence, I doff my hat for the executive and members of UI Alumni Association for organizing this all-important public service lecture and award ceremony. The title of the topic is well known to all of us: leadership question. The issue of leadership. The first thing I would like to point out is that the notion of leadership transcends political leadership. We must take serious account of leadership at the family level, the community level, the church, other institutions and organizations. Otherwise, those at the helm of affairs of those institutions will escape our scrutiny. The second point I want to make is that even from the scriptures, it is obvious that leadership was never intended to be a stroll through a rose garden. The third is that I do not believe that leaders are born. I have never had a doctor announcing that he has just delivered a newborn leader. Or have I seen any newspaper advert stating that a new leader was born yesterday? We therefore are all students in the journey of leadership. The fourth point I wish to emphasize is that the ability to inspire change is inherently an essential ingredient of every leader. Every leader in history is one who made a paradigm shift. Therefore, the way I understand the issue of leadership is that it must promote change. It must move people or an organization to another level and not be fettered by status quo. President Richard Nixon of the United States of America, in his classic book titled Leaders, examined 7 great men of history who, in his view, changed the world, and Nixon concluded that, and I quote, "When the curtain comes down on a leader's career, the very lives of the audience have been changed, and the course of history may have been profoundly altered," unquote. A leader as a change agent. For the interest of our youths here, perhaps it will be appropriate here to examine the attributes of some leaders who changed the world. A leader must be a man of courage and conviction if he must change the status quo. James Callaghan, former Prime Minister of Britain, captured it accurately when he said, and I quote, "A leader must have the courage to act even against an expert advice," unquote. A good example is Nelson Mandela of South Africa. Mandela was doing very well as a lawyer, but he had the courage and conviction to take on the apartheid system head-on, even when it cost him 27 years of his active life in prison. He did not waver. A leader must be visionary to effect change. A visionary leader must see possibilities beyond the present. He must be able to see tomorrow and shape the future without necessarily getting there. like Martin Luther King, proclaimed to the black Americans in the 60s, and I quote, "I have seen the promised land, but I may not get there with you," unquote. Tenacity is another attribute of a leader. A leader must stay the course even when the odds are against him. 3 leaders in history illustrate the importance of tenacity as an attribute of a leader. They are Winston Churchill of Britain, Charles de Gaulle of France, and Konrad Adenauer of Germany. These are real leaders who were brought to the fore by the World War II. Before the World War II, as Nixon observed in his book, Churchill was a lonely voice in opposition, failed many elections, and dismissed as an eccentric. De Gaulle was a lonely voice seeking in vain for an audience. Adenauer was a fugitive in his own country, Germany. These 3 giants demonstrated tenacity when their countries were devastated by the war. They taught their people how to rise up after a fall. We all may remember Churchill's blood, sweat, and tears speech that aroused Britain under the bombardment of Germans. Price of leadership. Leadership is essentially a selfless and more often than not a thankless enterprise, often with a price to pay. Oftentimes, the price is heavy. In the case of Mandela, the price was 27 years in prison. For Sadat, Agu Ironsi, Muritala Muhammad, John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King Jr., and Gandhi, it was their assassination. There are other lesser prices to pay. In Nigeria, for example, the most common price of leadership are smear campaigns and character assassination. There are also the nefarious activities of those with the pull him down syndrome, or what I have always described as Nshiko mentality. Where you put Nshiko, whether there are 20 or 40 in a basin with water, as you try to crawl out, the other Nshiko will draw you down, and all of you will remain in the basin of the water until the owner comes in and uses you for soup. But these prizes, big and small, have never and can never deter true leaders. Leadership challenge in Nigeria, that is where we are now. In his book, The Trouble with Nigeria, Chinua Achebe declared that the trouble with Nigeria is simply and squarely a failure of leadership. There is nothing basically wrong with the Nigerian character. There is nothing wrong with Nigerian land. There is nothing wrong with Nigerian water. There is nothing wrong with Nigerian air, climate, or anything else. Achebe blames the travails of the country on unwillingness or inability or incapacity of its leaders to rise to the responsibility, to the challenge of personal example, which are hallmarks of true leadership. According to Achebe, Nigeria is a nation for sale, hijacked since independence by thieves, bigots, mass murderers, war criminals, unpatriotic opportunists, election riggers, and other such venoms who have run the nation through an unnecessary civil war, corruption, and total despoliation. He concluded by saying that Nigeria is consequently a failed state, plagued by social injustice, plagued by unrest, debilitating poverty, disharmony, and ethno-religious turbulence. The walls of the letter Chebe vividly captures the gaps in the leadership of our country, Nigeria, at the federal level, state and local government levels. The consequences of all this is the several years of experimentation without solution. Current Nigerian challenge. Ordinarily, it should be taken as given that with the abundance of human resources at the disposal of this country, Nigeria, Nigeria should be able to record a quantum leap in development. Imagine the number of great brains and human capital across the globe who are Nigerians. Yet, back home, the fate of the country is determined and defined by individuals that are obvious square pegs in round holes. The motion without movement, harvest of failures, inertia, rudderlessness that hallmark the development streak of this country may forever be the cross we must all bear. Open newspapers any day, go to the markets, go to the drinking parlors, go to any hairdressing salon where women make their hairs. Making headlines and subjects of discussion are catalogs of political intrigues, corruption, scandals, terror, kidnapping, and unnecessary deaths. Our country, Nigeria, has become a patient in the intensive care unit. Is it not too late, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, to continue to give her 2 tablets of aspirin and laxative? I think anything short of complete new treatment will continue to be an exercise in futility. The truth today is that the cancer of our sins, which commenced with the 1966 military coup, has matured into full-blown AIDS and is yielding a staggering harvest of death. Let us look at the statistics. Vital statistics. I have decided to pick very vital statistics. There are big that can, fill 80-page books. But I give you little statistics that will make you begin to think. Today, in Nigeria, we have 40 million unemployed youths. 30% increase in divorce rate. The divorce rate in Nigeria today is the highest in the whole world. Nigeria has the largest extreme poverty population in the world as at today, with 87 million living in extreme poverty. Nigeria, shockingly, has a murder rate of 9.85%, 9.85 per 100,000 population. For every 100,000 population, 9.8 will be killed, will be murdered. It's the highest in the world. In the area of environment, the annual rate of deforestation in Nigeria today is approximately 4%, which is about 400,000 to 450,000 hectares per year. We are losing 450 hectares of our land to deforestation. Nigeria, therefore, has the highest rate of deforestation in the whole world. We are scoring first in all negative things. Again, we are now faced with rapid desert encroachment affecting 15 states in Nigeria. For example, out of the 909,890 square kilometers of our country's land area, about 600,000 square kilometers, or 65.94% of Nigeria's total land area is today completely lost to desert encroachment. Over 100 million people, or 50% of our citizens, are directly or indirectly being threatened by desertification, deforestation, and gully erosion. The leadership of this country must wake up now. According to Henry Cloud, and I quote, "There are times when we must accept small steps forward, and there are other times when we need to run like a buffalo," unquote. The time is now for us to run like a buffalo. Government alone, unfortunately, cannot do the magic. We must now all unite with the government to tackle our people's bizarre behavior, like refuse madness, indiscriminately cutting trees, open defecation, open grazing, and so on, in the midst of a climate emergency. It is an inescapable fact that we have gotten to the point of profound disconnection from our environment and disconnection from one another. We have behaved in a short-sighted way, dealing heavy blows to the environment, and today the environment is fighting back. My pieces of advice and opinion to the leadership: for the avoidance of doubt and for the interest of the current leadership, let me share my views on some burning issues in our current national debate. Number one, climate change disaster. Unknown to many, we have only a decade, 10 years now, before we tip over to disaster. Nigeria has only 10 years to tip over to disaster. We will lose our country to environmental disaster. Mr. President of the country, General Buhari, must decide now that climate change is a crisis worthy of Marshall Plan level response. To mobilize the people, to mobilize finance and technology on a scale never seen before. We must plant a minimum of 5 billion trees in Nigeria in the next 3 years. It is doable. We must all get our hands dirty on the ground in every community to plant trees. This is a matter of collective survival. By so doing, we will inadvertently be creating over 5 million climate jobs across the country in 3 years, in areas ranging from renewable energy, ecosystem restoration, agroecology, small-scale sustainable farming, raising appropriate seedlings, and so on. Modern climate awareness technique must now be indigenized, written, and delivered in Nigerian languages in order to drill the mass education down to the villages. Number 2, unitary government. I strongly believe that Nigeria cannot develop from Abuja. Abuja, the behemoth called the federal government, is becoming a disincentive for the development of Nigeria. We must consider reworking the country's articles of association to unleash the people's potential. Unitary government, as being practiced in Nigeria today, no longer works for anybody. The evidence is that virtually everything federal has failed or collapsed. The urgency of our situation demands a new normal, a clear and different structure through which our people will be organized to face the 21st century challenges. The earlier we stop ducking and diving with a political structure that has failed us for more than 50 years, the better for Nigeria and our people. Number 3, Biafran agitation and IPOB. Because of its security implication, all I will say here is to advise our present political leadership to avoid the mistake the British made in Northern Ireland. In Northern Ireland, the British made an avoidable mistake. They fell in the trap of believing that because they had power, they had weapons, they had soldiers, they had experience that dwarfed those of the insurgents. It did not matter what the people thought of them. History tells us that Britain couldn't defeat the Northern Ireland insurgents for more than 20 years. Peace and negotiation did the magic. For example, President Yar'Adua heeded this advice and succeeded with the Niger Delta militants and amnesty program. In the words of Attila the Hua, and I quote Attila the Hua, "It is never wise to gain by battle what may be gained through bloodless negotiation," unquote. Conclusion. Most distinguished audience, I want to conclude by reminding us that leadership is a consistent pattern even in the Bible. As Dr. Maxwell said, when God decided to raise a nation of his own, he didn't call on the masses. He called out one leader, Abraham. When he wanted to deliver his people out of Egypt, he didn't guide them as a group. He raised a leader to do it, Moses. When the time came for his people to cross into the promised land, they followed one man, Joshua. When he wanted to end segregation in America, he raised one man, a preacher, called Martin Luther King Jr. When he wanted to liberate India, he raised Mahatma Gandhi. When he wanted to end apartheid in South Africa, he raised Nelson Mandela. And Maxwell concluded by saying, and I quote, "Every time God desires to do something, and when he desires to do those things that are great and special, he calls a leader to step forward, unquote. And I want to conclude that definitely that will happen in Nigeria. Even as we are all sitting down here today, God calls on you. He calls on me to step forward, to change things, even in our communities. Thank you, and God bless all of you.